So let's assume that we're recording. Hello, everyone. So for the crime issue of ArabLit Quarterly, I translated this version of the Song of the Banu Sasan, which is a very unique document by Abu Dulaf, 10th century Iraqi kind of traveler and geologist and interesting figure who wrote down what one assumes was an oral tradition of these kinds of qasidas to the Banu Sasan, who were a confederation of thieves and beggars and charlatans that have an interesting complex history that maybe we can talk about afterwards. But so yeah. I'm just going to read a little bit. I'm going to read the end of the ode. So what has happened so far is an extensive litany of who is the Banu Sasan and what kind of activities they get up to. So in the middle of that, it starts with this. And we're those strutting studs who giggle and flirt through Friday prayers, and every saucy beggar queen prancing like a thoroughbred while her husband looks on, and all the throbbing hard-ons at Eid. And we are everyone who hopes only to scavenge the land or hide behind humility on a sad stone bench, and every naked waif cowering in the mosque, and all the patient poor in their quilted scraps and rags who roll up their prayer rugs and tramp around nonstop, and the rag pickers always ripping and sewing with their mats home to great nests of lice, and everyone sleeping in the snow and mud without so much as a ragged old coat whose every glance is a glower and every look is a leer, and who won't let up till they've fleeced all donors. And we're those filthy boys in bathhouse stoke rooms branded with poverty and restless as demons, crumb collectors and ration snatchers piling dried up crusts like freshly winnowed wheat to share out among themselves, and who tip the bathhouse stoker like good-hearted souls with a couple of nuts and half a radish. Oh God, make it rain on the Banu Sasan, see them bare and buff and puffed up and proud, strong-backed and shackle-scarred, their muscles rippling like Numrud bin Canaan. And they never make ablutions or even wipe their ass. They take pride in heresy and apostasy and thievery, and whoever doesn't like it can roll their scorn inside their prayer mat and kindly fuck off. Woe to whoever chases satisfaction. It's never like you thought, raven black or parrot bright or moon colored like a dove. As for me, I've milked fortune's tits one pair after another. I've circled the earth as many times as Al-Khidr, and for the free roamings like fire to gold. So if you've got a problem with my wandering, hear this. Didn't the Sayyids wander with all their prayers and vows, those saintly descendants of the Prophet? You see their graves from Kufa and Karbala to Baghdad and Samara, in Tus where the camels kneel, and Bukhara by the Shakri Canal. Salman and Ammar were wanderers, so was Abu Dar. Their holy tombs dot the world like shining stars. If I could squelch my desires, quench this thirst in my heart, I'd call this place my home and start issuing decrees. I'd fly my flag of glory high and victory. Or I might never make good. Maybe no one can help me. Then I'll never give up my search. But if one day I roll up, all rich and famous, I'll eat crushed reeds and lote tree leaves and just a shirt and a towel and be content.
That's a lovely ending.
Yeah, right. It's very uplifting.
Yeah, I would like to be so content. So what do you know about them, about the Banu Sasan?
So what we know about them is that it was a term that people used either to describe or to associate with, but it's not clear exactly what if it was like how to describe it. The idea was that one of the Sasanian Shahs of Persia had been deposed and become a wandering beggar and thief. And so thieves and beggars said that they were part of the order of Sasan, meaning that there was a kind of nobility to being a beggar and thief. And then there were these poems that were written in the name of the Banu Sasan that would circulate, but it's kind of like, who knows who wrote them, who was taking on that identity, who was it used to insult somebody, was it used to you know, romanticize and glamorize something, what it actually was referring to, how was there an actual Banu Sasan, or was it just a term that was thrown around? This is totally unclear.
Right. And there are a number of these qasidas. They appear through in different guises.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm not a huge expert on that, but I do know that there were several of them, and there are references to others which we don't have records of.
Right.
I think starting in the 8th century is the first time that the term starts to be thrown around. So it's already been around for 200 years or so by the time that Abu Dulaf writes this one down.
Right. And what attracted you to this one in particular?
Well, this is kind of in some way just one of those things of, as you study the literature, you know, you come across this book by Bosworth, the medieval underworld. And it's just one of those things that you come across. It's a unique work of scholarship. So I always, when I was teaching Arabic literature of the period, I always wanted to assign the text, but that Bosworth translation is unreadable. I mean, it's interesting. If you use your imagination, you can kind of see what it is, but I can't give it to undergrads and have them have any contact with what it is to be reading like a thieves' ode that has music and rhythm and satire and humor and all the levels of irony that are part of it. And so I had wondered like what it might be like, and then the text itself, what Abu Dulaf did is write in slang, and so one of the things that the text is known for is just a record of slang of the period, and which you just can't render. So there, you know, so what he did is write down the poem in slang and then footnote it, and then there are period footnotes of his that break down what the slang is, and they're very absurd and highly detailed, you know, so there's another project that we're talking about with another ArabLit reader from Taras Press, to do a proper translation of kind of try to render these different levels. But what I also wanted to do was just like, what were these songs that were, you know, circulating orally at that time, and try to see what I could possibly render that would be a readable version of something like that I could show to somebody.
So what did you focus on wanting to achieve with it? A rhythm, sort of a musicality of it, a sense of what it might have felt like at the time to read it? Or
I mean, who can do that? Yeah. You know, I mean, but yeah, so what I was trying to do was to stay true to the very specific references of what these ways of, you know, like the oatmeal enemas of it all, you know what I mean? It's just very like incredible. And so to try to stay true to those references and yet give it a flow, right? So I'm not gonna, I mean, the original qasida ends with almost the same rhyme in every line, which you just can't do in English in any reasonable way. So I try to use alliteration, which English is better at than rhyme in many ways, and just use different kind of repetitive constructions that give it a sense of coherence, of musicality, so you can read it as a poem while those specific things are not in the original, and I'm not reflecting the particular things that are in the original. So it's kind of trying to balance those different impulses.
Right. And so to what extent would you call it a translation versus an adaptation? Or
yeah, I mean, you know, it's also like what is it even, because you think of Abu Dulaf as doing this, writing down something that you can't ultimately ascribe to him, or it's his adaptation of a pre-existing oral tradition, which he's then doing his own pedantic satiric thing with. And I'm trying to reach, so it's like I'm trying to reach something that isn't in that original text almost. So it's like, yeah, translation as an act of recovery, or just like an imaginative, speculative rendering, maybe. I don't know, you could come up with different ways to talk about it like that, but it's definitely not a strict translation in the sense of, you know, if you also, because you have the original poem, then you have Abu Dulaf's footnotes, and then you have Bosworth's translation, and then he has this 90-page document of very exhaustive notes, and they're so fabulous that it's a shame not to kind of work all that material in. So some of the references in my version are drawing from Abu Dulaf's footnotes or Bosworth's footnotes. So there's different layers of the text that are being rendered. So it's definitely far from like a strict word for word translation.
Right. So can you give us an example of some footnote of either Abu Dulaf's or Bosworth?
Sure. Give me a second, and I can. So let's see. So on line 26, you know, he talks about al-kamad and al-abusat, and then in Bosworth will say al-kamad means, quote, he who copulates inordinately, you know.
Right.
Al-salaj is the person who rubs himself, i.e. masturbates. You know, but they're just like, you know, they're very clinical, explanatory, and some of them are, dara is when a person goes up to a shopkeeper who is mixing up harissa and begs a bowl of it from him. As soon as the shopkeeper gives it to him, he licks it all up. So, they're just these terms that, God knows.
Right.
But,
for the very specific charlatanism of
yeah, exactly. And then, so another thing that really interests me about this text is there's a scholar from CUNY, where I also like study and teach sometimes, whose name is, let me get it, Christina Richardson. So she studies, among other things, Romani and Gypsy history. And so according to her, some of these slang words are the first written record of any Romani slang. And so that there's within the mythologized history of the ethnicity, such as it is of Roma or whatever the very different terms that you use to describe that group, there's this idea of people moving across from the subcontinent through the Middle East, eventually into the Balkans. And so this is a record in some potentially of that migration. And there's a kind of ethos within the poem that almost feeds into the stereotypes about the Roma population. That I used to work with the Roma population in the Balkans, so I had some experience with this kind of thing. So it's interesting to me to think about this is on some way like a historical verification of the existence of an ethnicity, and then at the same time that it validates stereotypes that you can say are 1,000 years old.
Right.
It's fascinating.
So we don't know anything about who the readers for this would have been, who Abu Dulaf's readers for this would have been.
Well, he had a readership in Baghdad among the literate population at that time, and there, it seems to me that there was a kind of fascination with the Banu Sasan, with these kind of slang words, that there it was, yeah. So it was a little bit like Hariri, in the sense of it's popularizing stories of earthy, body stuff to a literate class of people who are interested in that kind of thing for kicks,
Right. And we don't have, to what extent might we know, did whether this felt naughty to them as well?
Who knows? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Right. So something that looks to us as so transgressive now.
Yeah.
Hard to say to what extent it was transgressive at the time.
I don't know. I mean, I guess there is something about the pose of the kind of pose of the poet is definitely kind of, like wearing shame with pride, right? So it implies that that what he's saying, like that it wasn't normal to go around with an oatmeal enema, you know what I mean? Like like slouching by the side of the road, like, you know, so there was at least something that was, you know, that there's like a rhetorical gesture that makes sense to take pride in that, and that kind of thing, those kinds of activities of, like, you know, wiping your ass on the minaret, which not everybody was really into.
And some people might have frowned on it as a practice.
Exactly. Some people might have gotten judgmental about that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So you think that there's something kind of comic, salacious, that it seems hard to imagine that the people from that time wouldn't have responded to that in a similar way than we do now. Just like, you get the joke, right? Like,
right.
So.
Right, and part of the joke is on the imaginary other person who is getting these tricks played on them, who's falling for the charlatans.
I guess, yeah. There's that. There's the person that thinks that there's value in living an upright life and playing by the rules and doing things properly. You know, there's a lot of different ways to be a mark in this, because some of what he's celebrating is like sexual abuse, and it's not. So you're never really comfortable with the narrator either. You know, like, you can't really identify with the narrator either. So, yeah.
Right, and so where does the person land in this? I mean, just in the sort of exotica of it as well, right? Like, here are some peoples that are so different from me.
I mean, I guess it's also maybe the trap is to impose coherence on it, because in some way he's working off a traditional Qasida form also that starts with this kind of like, oh, here we are, and you know, what is life but a fleeting dream, and this kind of melancholy pose of the Qasida poets that you see in other literature. And then at the end he comes down to being almost like what you see in the maqamat also, like almost like I give it all up and I'm happy in my towel with my lot tree leaves and I don't want anything. So there's and then between those 2 points you have madness of all imaginable kinds, and transgressive sexuality, like all kinds of blasphemy. And so trying to turn that, so either it's challenging the idea of like, what is a person? So a person is somebody that can encompass all those things, which of course is true, and in some way is a kind of like that is like the proper field of literature, is to let complexity be in its irreducible way. And then at the same time you're dealing with an identity that's emerging out of playing with traditional form, like playing with the audience's taste for what might be considered transgressive, salacious, or whatever, and still trying to like resolve it in a way that's almost like acceptable to the moral, religious sensibilities of the audience, and that it can't be collapsible into like an actual, you know, coherent identity.
Right. I mean, yeah, you can't really identify with a beginning, middle, and end, and then the character who you understand. No, I mean, yeah, the end sort of just
Yeah.
at you right there.
Right.
All right, so really, thank you so much. But before we end this, can you just tell us where you are right now? So I'm in Rabat, Morocco, which is where I usually am, and you are not where you usually are.
I am in the outskirts of Tarapoto in northeastern Peru, where I've been stuck since early March. So yeah, I came down thinking I would be here for 12 days, and they imposed a state of emergency and sealed the borders and stopped all domestic and international travel, and that is still the case now on July 7th. So,
right.
Yeah.
And that's where you worked on the translation.
Yes, I did the translation right here, sitting in these mornings. I actually worked on it during Ramadan, so it seemed like somehow a nice activity to do during Ramadan.
All right, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.